Fantastic.
So welcome everybody here. I'll kick us off here. I'm Dave Edminster. I am the Director of Cybersecurity Practices here at EVOTEK, and I'm joined by colleague and I'm going to say friend at this point, Robb Reck. Robb actually is, and I'm going to let you do a much better job of introducing yourself, Robb. But for those that are in the Colorado area, you may have heard Robb's dulcet voice on the Colorado Security podcast before. That's where I actually got to know of Robb in the past. But Robb, without further ado, I'll let you introduce yourself and do a much better job than I am at discussing what your background is and your experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Well, I'm super excited to get to chat with people today. This is my first EVOTEK Security Summit, and a lot of great topics, a lot of great speakers. I'm really feel fortunate to be among them. I've been the field CISO for Red Canary for just a few months. Previous to that, I spent almost my whole career. There's a lot of gray in this beard. As a security leader, I was running security for Red Canary. Previous to that, I ran security for Ping Identity and financial service companies for about a decade or so before that. Excited to get a chance to do this. As you mentioned, I'm pretty involved with the community in Colorado with a group called Colorado Equal Security. Looking forward to chatting a little bit about how we approach security and how we can kind of try and flip from a reactive mindset to proactive. Dave,
right.
I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, and so my background, just for those that may not know me, I've been in IT for around 30 years. The last 15 or so have been very security focused. I've led IT programs as an IT leader and built those programs. I've been with EVOTEK for 3 years now as a cybersecurity architect and then as the director of our cybersecurity practice. So that's my high level background in security. And as Robb said, we're going to discuss here how to be more proactive as opposed to reactive in the security space. And that's really our discussion core here. And so I'll kick it off with just at a high level. I think everybody who's been in security, been in alerting, been in logging can understand and commiserate with the stress and challenges that it comes with trying to be proactive about your security program as opposed to purely reactive. There's so much going on in the security space that amounts to logging your data, getting sensors in place, aggregating your data, and alerting your teams. And that's a real reactive stance, a real reactive posture, I would say, Robb. And I don't know if you feel differently, but that's, I think, the real challenge for one is most programs start with reactive as you get those alerts, as you get notifications, even getting the tools in place. And I think, that leads to, alert fatigue, which is a very overused term, but I mean, it's the truth. If you've ever deployed a tool and you just turn on that first report about, hey, I've got it in place, let me start alerting. Within a day, you no longer want to be in security. You no longer want to be working on this tool. You'd rather be doing anything else in life, including shoveling snow like we do here in Colorado on a regular, rather than that. So Robb, I don't know if you have any thoughts or experiences with alert fatigue, how you start trying to remediate that and address it, because it's a real challenge. It's a real pain.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different angles that you can look at from a reactive versus proactive element of security. I think the bigger challenge and the one that I want to spend most of our time chatting about here this morning is it within the security operations function. And I know Dave, you come from an IT background. I do as well. Whether you're in IT or security or probably anywhere else, if you are a ticket queue driven team, you almost always will default to a really reactive business. Mm-hmm. That, hey, there's tickets waiting for me, and there's this mindset, right? I got to look at this ticket. I got to resolve it one way or the other so I can get to the next ticket in the queue.
Right.
And that's a really tough problem to solve, right? And you talk about alert fatigue. I think that is like the definition of alert fatigue is when your focus is not on root cause analysis, but on resolution of a certain case. That's I think where the fundamental problem is. I'd like to spend as much time talking about today as possible.
Absolutely. And I think it really does matter in that ticketing kind of solution about a paradigm shift, if you will, for those teams that are doing ticket, because it's a break fix typically that they look at. Ticket comes in, you have to address the issue, go fix it. If it's security, that could be a huge wide range of who gets this ticket. Is this a network team? Is this an application team? Is this sysadmins? Is this something very specific to security that's unknown? And having that kind of one directional piece there too, who's your traffic controller? Who's your traffic cop? Do you have a system that can help with that? And then also, do you have those teams actually integrated into your solution? And that's just the reactive part. We're actually, we don't really want to talk about reactive so much as proactive, like you said, and to actually get it to the point where we're not having to deal with alert fatigue. And that can come into tools. That definitely is a process thing and a paradigm shift. And I think it really behooves people and teams to talk about, how do you integrate like a cultural shift? How do you get more of your individuals to understand, a culture of security and the proactive tools and processes that can actually help deal with that challenge?
Yeah. So Dave, I don't want to bury the lead. I think like we have 45 minutes here. I think there's one critically important point that I'm going to make the whole time. Anyone who's listening, hope you've joined by now, because I'm going to make it. I'll probably have to come back to it 5 more times. What's the key to this? I believe that the key is when, hiring, training, enabling people to change the mindset from I'm a security analyst whose job is to resolve this alert to I am a security engineer to ensure this alert never happens again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stop there. I'm going to say it again, right? They need to change the mindset from I am a security analyst whose job is to resolve an alert to I'm a security engineer whose job is to ensure that this alert never happens again. This is not just, hey, I take the same person and say, hey, I heard these two sentences that you should go do. Like, it's a hiring thing. It's a training thing. It's a rewards and incentives throughout your program. If you're still passing them, way too many alerts, like it's not going to work, right? It's going to take a migration over time to go from, hey, I'm taking this alert from my SIEM, I'm taking this alert from my firewall and running it down. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what does it mean to run it down? Does it mean at the end of it, I said, hey, this is true positive or false positive. I hit a accept or deny in my workflow and that's it? Or does it mean I'm actually going into this tooling and I'm tuning it so we'll never get that again? Or if it's a problem, and let's say many of us, I'm sure Dave, you have, I've had like organizations where we get the same problem on a regular basis. All right, well, that means you probably need to be more creative in how you engineer defenses to stop that from being able to happen again. Not just false positives, but true positives can be engineered away as well, right? By not by tuning out the alert, but by fixing the gap that those things were allowing those things to happen. And it's just this mindset. How do you train and hire an engineering mindset? Mm-hmm. I gave myself a story or two. I wanted to talk about this. I have implemented a few SIMs in my career, from like, the big Cadillac of all SIMs from a decade or so ago that everyone, knows how hard it was to manage, to more modern recent ones. And I would say that the first few implementations that I either participated in or I managed the people who were participating in didn't go that well. And the reason they didn't go that well was, hey, we kind of follow the playbook of put all your data in this place. Yeah. Look for what kind of sets of rules they have that are applicable to my environment. Hey, we're a PCI compliant environment. Let's turn on the PCI rules. Turning these things on. You go through this implementation process. You turn on this set of rules, and all of a sudden, there's this deluge of false positives or things you don't understand. And my experience with all 3 of those implementations was that I spent the rest of time in that place trying to get value out of this tool that I had implemented, and probably never actually getting there. Mm-hmm. I did it a few times, and I may be dumb, but I'm not that dumb. Like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do it the same way the next time, right? And like when I did it with a second time with the more modern tool, I said, all right, we're not going to make that mistake again. But I had some more junior people on the team who were able to convince me, turn on a few of these things, and we got the same one. When I started to see some success at implementing a SIM program, and I like to talk about program versus just a tool because it doesn't always have to be one tool. But as I got some success, it looked like instead of turning on a recommended set of rules from my SIM provider, it was an internal process to say, what are the things that matter to my company? Where's the data? Where's the data that we want to make sure that's most important to us? What kind of behaviors in that environment could put that data at risk? And rather than turning on a set of 50 rules that are going to fire for the rest of time, we started creating our own rules. Mm-hmm. We started really having a crafted approach to what things made sense, an engineering approach to it. And every single time an alert kicked out, it was really interesting to us, right? Occasionally you make a mistake and you have to tune it. But it became this like really valuable source of information when you create those alerts yourself, or things that are really specific to you. And if you say, well, then you don't have much to do because there's not any alerts turned on. Well, great. Then those people can spend more time creating more of those really high value alerts.
Absolutely.
That's what I've had the opportunity to learn a couple of times. And, I didn't want to name the SIMs that weren't successful, but I'm happy to talk about some places we have had success. We built our own elk stack that we ended up doing alerting on. That's kind of hard to manage from an administrative perspective. We were able to reproduce that same success using things like Sumo Logic and Splunk, which, you can, they are like, at the end of it, it's just a really easy to search, database, right? And being able to create those things made a massive difference. All right, Dave, I know I talked for a while. Let me throw it over to you. So what you think?
No, absolutely. I think it's a really good point that you bring up, and something that I think I want to dive into briefly is talking about canned reports that come out of most of those tools, be it a SIM or alerting tool or whatever it is. It was the SolarWinds or anything of that sort that's generating logging and tool alerts, I should say. I would dare say that out of the boxed alerts that come out of those reports are, to your point, not that useful. I think most of those SIMs and most of those tools actually build them in there because there's demand. Like, how do I actually start getting data and alerts fast? And that they're, as a company and as a vendor, they're motivated to do that. And I get why. They're meeting a need that the clients have asked for. But that's it, I think, to your point, if you actually go into that tool and you customize and build your own reports, build your own alerts, it's going to be much more meaningful, and it's going to actually drive some kind of results because your teams are actually understanding what are we actually looking at, because you just said it's applicable to their business. It may not be stuff that's just every business has it. This is more focused to what alerts you've got. You understand it. You have a better understanding of how the alerts work, and you can tune it and fine tune it. And I think that helps to avoid a lot of that alert fatigue that comes up with just turning on any kind of canned report, that suddenly we don't want to be a part of this community and in this career at all after 24 hours of just a canned report coming out and inundating you and your team with tickets. So I think that's a really good call out there, that deploying your tool isn't the only thing, and it never is, right? Everybody knows that there's care and feeding to any of the tools that you actually get and deploy, and having an understanding of it. But those alerts and fine tuning them to exactly what you need and doing it with a methodology that makes sense, I think is really important. Not just cast a huge net and try to catch everything, because no one's going to do anything. You're just going to see all this noise, and no one's going to actually fix anything. And I think it's also important to go back to what you were saying. If you're seeing a constant alert coming up that's repeating, that's something that needs to be actioned so that it never comes up again. Either fix the core problem, fine tune the alerts, see is this a false positive, negative, but get a real result to it, as opposed to, and I've seen this before in places where someone's like, yeah, I get that alert 4 times a day, I don't do anything with it. Like,
yeah, well, it's just human nature that if you're a leader, or if you're not a manager of people, you're still a leader on your team if you can help direct them, right? If you have a team that is currently kind of accepting false positives and is kind of looking around them, there's really a lot of danger there.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're training them that they have to apply a filter to the things that come out of that tool on their own side to determine, is this worth it or not? And that comes with a lot of risk. We've seen numerous examples of places like the most obvious one is the Target breach, where right. FireEye had actually found the bad thing that happened, but their security analysts were so used to false positives, they ignored it. You may think, no, I got it. But either maybe you do, but maybe someone else doesn't, or maybe you don't really got it, because it's really hard to continually have that filter in your head and to not make a mistake. What you want is such a high level of fidelity, of confidence that comes from your tools, that when it speaks up, your ears perk up and you go, hey, I gotta take this seriously. If you're not feeling that with your tools, you got to spend more time on it. And the good news is it probably doesn't cost anything. You probably don't have to go spend any more money to make these tools more effective. You need to spend more time. Go to the vendor who provided it and say, I need your help to make this more effective. And if they aren't willing to help you for cheap or free, they might not be the right vendor, because we should all be incentivized to having these things be useful.
Absolutely. And I think it always lean on the vendor and any of your, if you've got it, whoever your partner is around it, about, hey, this is not working the way I need it to. And let's get it up to that point, and don't let it go. Don't just let it sit like, yeah, that's just a shortcoming, or we can live with it. There's a point where you shouldn't be living with it. You can't live with it, and you've got to take it seriously. And I think it also dovetails into having teams, be it your dedicated security team or other teams that have some responsibility, like network or sysops or whatever it is there, that they've got skin in the game, and making them know that if you have concerns, bring them up, and vice versa. Make this collaborative in the sense that give them a view into the tool, give them a view into the alerts, not just the like ticketing, go fix this kind of a thing. Have them understand what's going on. And I think that's that kind of culture of security that I like to try to talk about in a broader organization where it's collaborative, because security, as I'm sure you've seen, and we all experience a lot, security is often the department of no, and everybody doesn't like dealing with security. So it's that part where how do we collectively use this kind of stuff to not just inundate our team or inundate theirs, but be a cooperative team about trying to fix problems long term. And that may mean sitting down, I think, at the beginning of your tool architecture and talking with those teams, those stakeholders about, here are the kind of things we're expecting to try to see or expecting to try to deal with this tool. What do you think concerns are in, say, the network space or on your servers or whatever, or your application that we may need to start dealing with proactively?
Yeah. Hey, Dave, I've got one more suggestion. Maybe this one might be a slightly more controversial take, and I'm curious about your perspective on it. Mm-hmm. Over time, one of the things I've experienced as a leader of security operations programs is people who say, I want this information to show up in the SIM to provide me with context. It's not actionable, it's contextual. So for example, I want to know about every new AWS account that's created. I want to know about, by the way, these are interesting things, right? Mm-hmm. Like I don't doubt that. My contention is mixing context information with I need to respond to alert information causes the same problem as false positives, where it goes from when something shows up as a note in my SIM on my workflow. Yep. I don't need to think of it as being all that urgent. If it's, hey, there's a new login from this country. Oh, it's fine. People log in from there, but I want to be aware because it lets me know people are moving around. Like I think context is really important. And I don't want to say we shouldn't have context, but it needs to somehow be separated from this inbound work for us to manage from a security operations perspective. And if you can't figure out how to do that, like then get rid of the context and so you just find another way for context. I think it's just so important that the alert that comes out of your system, it is a drop everything and deal with it alert, so that when it really is a drop everything and deal with it alert, that's what you do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that you want to have that fidelity is key, and reducing noise. I think is a huge part of that here, be it the context or whatever, which agree, like context is a huge part of it. But whenever anybody's asking for context, I think you have a good point about it should be a discussion of why, and really why. Like, what is the goal of getting this additional information in here? Is it just information for the sake of information? Is this about tracking a vulnerability in the past or a potential attack, and going back through it? Or is this more like you just want to know it for the sake of knowing it? And if you do, how do we put it into a place, if you really do need it, how do you put it in a place that isn't adding noise to the teams that are actually trying to deal with alerts and real problems? Because you've got to actually be able to identify key risks and key attacks or what they may be right away and action them right away, as opposed to everything being a critical issue. Because if everything's critical, nothing's critical. Yeah. And then everything's just, you're going to miss some really critical things. And then you're going to have teams dealing with things that are comparatively trivial. Not that they're not important in some way, but should they be dealing with that thing that's private, internal to like 2 or 3 users, or should they be dealing with the thing that's internet facing that just got 47 alerts that you don't know what those are about? As a human, you should be able to determine which those are. But once you have people in a ticketing system and only in a ticketing system, I think they tend to just deal with it in the waterfall method of like what comes in. Maybe not waterfall so much as drinking from the fire hose, really. What comes in is what you try to deal with in order, or you cherry pick.
Yeah, that sounds great. We got a couple of comments or questions in here. Is it Laney or Lonnie?
Laney.
Laney, what are successful strategies you've seen to pivot from issue resolution to RCA issue prevention? And I'm going to go back to my original kind of what I think is the big key here. of moving from an analyst mindset to an engineering mindset. Okay, well, how do you go from an analyst mindset to an engineering mindset? An analyst is there to interpret and maybe act upon something. An engineer is here to go change things. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They're here to either go implement a new solution to stop it, to go write new detections to make sure we detect it faster in the future, to automate the response to it, something like that. And that requires number one, a skill set that may or may not exist in the team right now. If you've got a 4-person analyst team and you don't have any engineers, you might need to hire an engineer who can come in and like start teaching. We're going to start doing sprints. We're going to start talking about, oh man, I'm struggling with the words right now. My agile words have failed me. But we're gonna start talking about the requirements that we need to engineer to solve these things, and start just getting that mindset understood across the team, and working publicly so the other people on the team can see it. But you have to have someone on the team who knows how to do engineering, who knows how to address this, not as a hey, I'm going to figure out if it's bad or good, but I'm going to figure out how to stop it in the future. Do it publicly, reward the results of that, really start that culture change. What do you think, Dave?
I wholeheartely agree. The culture change, I think, is key. And something about a lot of the individuals, whatever vertical they work in, whatever team they work in, the people that fix things, unless it's like really big fires that they put out, often don't get the recognition for fixing things and keeping the lights on. So I think to that recognition point you make there, being able to call out in some organizations, I've seen kind of basically a who did great work list that actually gets kind of just announced periodically in a certain vector, like every quarter or whatnot. These people, like, kudos list. These did some these people did some really great work here that we want to acknowledge. So I think that helps change the mindset and actually get involvement from those team members as to the culture change you're talking about. And then, actually understanding the tools, like we talked about, that curiosity mindset. Some of the best individuals I've worked with, regardless of their role, the ones that did so well were just really curious about stuff. They'd see something that was just this little alert or this little thing that's broke that bugs me. And they're like, I really want to figure out why. And they dig into it. And sometimes it's a rabbit hole that takes weeks of just ancillary work. But then they come up with this really deep understanding of what it was and help fix a situation and train people on it. Like, hey, I found this really nifty thing or weird thing, and here's why this happened. And then others get interested in that too. Yeah. So I love seeing that happen. I love encouraging that. And I love it when I see that encouraged in any team, anywhere. But there is also a balancing act, right? We don't want somebody to grab every strange little thing all the time. There's got to be that priority and that balancing act of, how do we keep the lights on? How do we take care of the big things? But how do we also let people dig into the strange esoteric of things that are going on in any environment? Yeah. And I don't know if you have thoughts about how to, encourage that. And
I got a couple things. Lanny posted another comment that I think is related to this, and to what you said. You don't start off by saying, go convert every alert into an engineering task, because all you're going to do is overwhelm your team and you're going to fail. You start off by saying, all right, I got 1,000 alerts in the last month. How many of those are duplicate type of alerts? All right, well, it looks like 60% of these alerts came from 4 different types of things. All right, well, now it's very clear what my first 4 things to focus on should be. And you don't have to go assign it to one person. You can say, we're going to spend a 90-minute session as a team working on how do we engineer away these alerts. Right. And like you probably have 1 or 2 people out of your 5 or 6 person team who are better at this than anyone else. Them talking about solving it in front of the rest of the team starts to bring other people up to that level. Do it publicly those first few times. Assigning, over time you can assign, specific tasks to specific people, and they can go tap on other resources. But starting off in a joint communal way on the biggest problems the team sees, that's going to really start putting that culture in place. Yeah. Reward it. You can track metrics on how many repeat alerts you get in your system. I'd be a little bit nervous about like calling it success or failure or reporting those things, because I think you can start to game it, and and frankly, you might start to miss things if people start trying to automate things a way that they can't. Yeah. But you can still track it for your own edification to know, hey, we're making some progress or we're not. Over time, you should see a much higher percentage of things that are unique versus, repeating alerts over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that training piece there and getting the other team members involved, because there's cross training that happens in an active way. There's cross training that can happen in a passive way with those teams actually going through that session together, and they see, hey, here's how John is dealing with this thing, and wow, I really appreciate the approach he's taking on, and they start to learn, like you're saying, how to maybe go about it better, and they get interested in this too. How do I squash some of these issues? How do I get in there? And I've seen it before in my career. I imagine you have too, where you have somebody who hasn't done that before. And the first time they get a chance to do it and they really squash something that's a pretty big deal, like that's great. The excitement on their face and the engagement they give for there, I love that. And so when you get that, I think that's where you start to see more like encouragement and maturity in a really positive way from a team member.
Yeah, and just keep in mind that first time someone does it, they're going to be super excited.
Yeah.
And you as a leader, how you respond to that is going to be important as well. Keep in mind when somebody spends the weekend fixing a problem that maybe was caused by a lack of automation, by a lack of the right process. They do these heroic efforts to keep us running. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes we do and should acknowledge, like, thank you so much for that big work. And there's a lot of recognition for that human who worked so hard. Mm-hmm. The person who goes and automates away an alert might do so silently, and as people may never notice it. Mm-hmm. And we need to make sure we are acknowledging that behavior as just as much as the behavior that we, frankly, like, yeah, we want you to do heroic efforts if it's needed, but man, let's make it so we don't need heroic efforts.
Yeah.
And that's, and the heroic efforts are the visible thing. So a lot of time we praise it disproportionately versus that automation that made it go away. So if you can find ways to pull up the examples of people who have done a great job of the behavior we're looking to see versus just those who are working so hard to fix things that already got broken due to bad behaviors earlier, like that's a really important part of management for this kind of a team as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We all love firefighters that can be heroes, but we don't want to be building organizations that require heroes every day. We want to be building organization and teams that hopefully we don't need to fight fires. We're just maintaining things. And that's so important. And it's not sexy. It's not the kind of thing that people get recognition for. So I think your call out there is really on point and extremely important, because we don't want those people who are doing such great work that just doesn't seem to be heroic to get burnt out or feel marginalized and feel like they're not a part of a bigger team. Like, and it also, if you have teams that have lots of heroic actions, it tends to shift teams to trying to be heroes all the time, not to be your maintenance people in that regard. And that's definitely not what we want, not anywhere.
Yeah.
One quick point I wanted to make, because I know we're coming up on time, and I think we've covered some of the questions in here, but from a technology point of view too, some of the things that can help with this that have potential are like the SOAR and XSOAR type solutions that are out and coming out and maturing. But I do want to make it clear that they're not a panacea for this issue. They require just as much care and feeding and methodological approach and getting them working right and having them integrate. When you can have alerts go on and have a SOAR XSOAR product actually remediate stuff, takes just as much work to get the alerting right as it does to actually solve the problem. So I've seen a couple of places where they're like, we'll just get a SOAR solution in here and that'll solve all our needs. Well, a tool that isn't deployed and managed well is not going to be a particularly useful tool.
Yeah, you're right, Dave. There's really functionally, SOARs can do more things than a SIM can do, but if you don't come at it with the right mindset, it's just going to become yet another place that you're getting a different set of alerts from. You really need to change the mindset of your security team. Like, I'll be honest, like, I'm not sure that I would have been great at this engineering mindset. I was always like fighting fires, and frankly, I hated it. Right. And later on in my career, as I started to figure out, let's automate these things away, it's really changed the skill sets that I've looked to hire for. And what I think makes a team successful, it's the skills, but it's much more important, like the mindset. Mm-hmm. I am here to fix the problem versus just pointing out the problem for someone else to fix or to redirect onto some different tier within the organization. Like, you need that first line of defense to think I'm also going to be the one to change that so it never happens again.
Right. I think a sense of ownership that can come with that too, that it's not just I found this and someone has to go fix it. I've reported it, I'm done. It's here's some thoughts I maybe have, if that's an option for them, or to skill up, or I found it and I've started taking these efforts to actually remediate the problem here. That's a huge piece. And I think it's key that you pointed out, where we look for those individuals and we help uplift those who have it, and those who don't, we help instill that into them, and we welcome it. That we don't just want people pointing out problems. We want people actually bringing solutions to the table too. Or even if those solutions, like a recommendation, maybe it's not right, but let's talk about it and see what the best solution is.
Yeah. We have another question from Lanny. Dale, I'll let you take a first swag at this. We talked about upskilling necessary to make this change. Any resources that you recommend? Maybe vendor specific or just generally any recommended resources?
I love the mentor approach around those, where you actually pair up. I kind of call it battle buddies sometimes, where you've got someone who's particularly good at something like that, and you've got team members that maybe need more experience. Having them pair up on problems like that, like if it is, say it was Lainey in this project, in a project like that, we're like, hey, let's have Lainey lead this other team member about how Lainey deals with this problem and goes through this methodology, as well as any other kind of leadership in the organization. Because I think it gives a really good opportunity for more Q&A, not just what did you did, but what happened, but why you did it. Why did someone go down that rabbit hole or look this place first? Because I wouldn't have thought of that. I'm not sure if you've got a different approach though, or your thoughts on that.
I mean, I love your approach, and I think it's probably like the best you get is having a human who can be that mentor for you. The second to that, I would say, I'm actually not that interested in vendor specific resources. I think you're much better off like getting a solid understanding of how the technologies work. Like if I got to pick one thing for you to learn, number one, learn how to script. Number two, learn in depth how systems talk to each other. Yeah. From the networking perspective, from the a SAML, a YAML. How do these systems talk to each other? The better you can understand those things and scripting, like you should be able to pick up any vendor technology. Mm-hmm. And I'd much rather hire someone who can script their way through solving a problem than knows the ins and outs of a GUI, because that's going to be really transferable to whatever other tool we go to.
Absolutely.
And by the way, it's free, right? There's all kinds of free resources on the web to learn how to code, how to script. Go start with Python, start with PowerShell, whatever your preference is.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot there, and those interfaces, be it on-prem or systems or cloud, I mean, it's everywhere, to your point. There's no place that those scripts don't really touch on at this point in time.
Yeah.
So I don't see any other questions in here at this point, and I think we're getting close to time, if memory serves.
Any other questions for us from the peanut gallery?
One thing I think it's probably worth continuing to discuss too is it should always be an iterative approach too with any of these kind of learning models, be it deploying a tool, being it managing a tool. It should never be like set it and forget it. We all talk about it and vendors do that. But the reality is you've got to have good hygiene about your tool, about your reporting, about your inventory, whatever it is, because things continue to change. And too much, we're all inundated with alerts, with concerns, with problems. I think it makes good sense for an organization to have a regular cadence of reviewing this at a significant level, not just like a touch point and on, but I'd say quarterly to have that team looking at what is our current state of this alerting tool, our concerns, our vulnerability management, whatever this is here, not just break fix, but hey, is there something we should be looking at systemically within the organization here? Should we be changing fundamentally how something is working here, how this alerting is working, how this reporting is working?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different levels at which we should be doing that review. I think quarterly is great for like a big picture. Mm-hmm. All right, where are we? And then, okay, every 2 weeks, if we're doing like sprint-based work, every 2 weeks, what are we going to chunk out these next 2 weeks to get there? What are the biggest alerts in front of us? And, you do 2 weeks of work, what quarterly. So we're talking about, six sprints per quarter. You get to that quarter and you say, all right, what did those 6 sprints get us? We mm-hmm. went from previously where 80% of our alerts were duplicative, and now we're down to 74%. All right, we made that progress. And I'm like, hey, it's not all going to happen at once, but we should get to the place where all of a sudden, you realize, man, it's different now than it was a year ago. We're now in a place where we understand our alerts better, where the alerts that we get are more interesting because there's so much less that we're having to manually, human-wise filter out. You did some automation. Hey, I couldn't automate away this alert altogether, but at least I was able to say, whenever this alert comes in, I go pull these 4 other pieces of context, and that took me 12 minutes I automated the pulling of the context.
Right.
So now instead of it taking me, 20 minutes to handle this alert, it takes me 7 minutes because I got the information, I understand it better, I can go much faster, right? Like you start to measure those things, and that's how you get scale. That's how you get an engaged operations team. And like you said, having that picture, because it's like the boiling water with the frog. You might not notice that that you're making progress when you're in the middle of it, but if you take a snapshot and you look a quarter later, it is noticeable.
Yeah. And it's really good to call that out. It's really good to discuss that piece, that it's got to be systemic. It's got to be something you address on the regular. If you're not, it's out of sight and out of mind. Nobody's going to deal with it. It's just going to be business as usual until something catastrophic happens. And then it becomes a question, why didn't we catch this? Why didn't we deal with this better? And everyone will have different answers. And something that it brings up too is the automation part you talked about, like giving that extra context and doing those kind of achievements and those kind of improvements are huge. And I would also dovetail and add into that, for the team members that are doing those things, is writing some simple run books about either how do I improve this automation or how do I improve this discoverability, so that other teams can refer to it as well and see how do I have to do these 7 other things when this particular alert comes up. I don't know how to automate it. I could go talk to John and have that, but maybe I could get better at this automation or the scripting part of this. If John had written a run book about that the rest of the team can use, those references can start to grow a team in a consistent way, as long as everybody knows they're there and contributes to them.
Yeah. You just mentioned run books, and it made me remember a point that I didn't give myself to I didn't write down to say, but I should have. One of the security leaders who worked for me had what I consider to be one of the smartest rules I've seen in security operations. He said, for every single alert that can come out of our SIM, you have to have a run book. You have to tell me what you're going to do with it. It can't be just sitting on the analyst's judgment to know what to do, because it's number one, like not everybody's going to have the same judgment. Number two, it probably means it's not actionable. If you can't write a run book, it probably means it's not actionable. So he pushed super hard into that. And that requirement that every alert had to have a run book drove a ton of good engineering. I don't have anything I could do with this alert. That means I either need to change the alert, or I need to go figure out why it exists in the first place, right? It got away from the hey, I'm just going to make a subjective decision right now that this is okay. It was a big step, and I recommend others to consider implementing. You have to have a run book for any alerts that come out of your tool.
That's a great call too, and I imagine it makes sense for any new alerts that are coming up. If there wasn't a run book for it, is either volunteers or voluntolding somebody about who's going to own this, the creation of this run book for this particular incident and this type, so that we can actually flesh this out and do that, meet that, and build that document repository. I see in the Q&A section that Caitlin actually asked a question just a minute ago, and so I'll read it out here and we can address that. But do you see security and IT teams working together to address some of these reactive challenges, or does the responsibility fall solely to the security teams? How can companies get a more collaborative effort with IT and security? And I think that's a fantastic question, because I've seen it in my career. I dare say you've seen it in yours, Rob, and we see it everywhere out there. I can take a real quick first pass, but I want to make sure you give you time, Rob. I think it's key to have security teams working with all the other technology teams proactively and collaboratively. IT being a key part of that too. If your security team is very siloed off from your IT team or any others, you're going to have friction, and you're not going to have a very cooperative system, and it's going to delay things, and it's going to obfuscate, and it's going to confuse, and people are going to be mad, and everyone's going to look at security as the bad guys. I think it's key to have leadership for sure within those teams talking to one another proactively. I think it makes sense to have a regular cadence if those teams don't report in the same way, that they actually are talking to each other about their concerns and about their needs. And I can soapbox on this forever, given my own IT and security background. But Rob, I want to make sure you got a chance to talk about it too.
Man, it's like the fundamental truth of security and IT is there is a built-in conflict of interest between them. In some ways it's good, right? You need somebody advocating for, speed and, user experience and all these other great IT things. And you need someone advocating for confidentiality and integrity and availability of systems. And sometimes those requirements, those outcomes are at odds.
Yeah.
The way you get around that is through personal relationships and trust that's built over time, that I know you want the right thing for my customers. You know, I want the right thing for my customers. We know that a good experience and a secure experience are good for our customers. All right, let's figure out how we get there, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to build that trust, because a lot of security people have broken that trust by the way that they've addressed. And I'd be honest, a lot of IT people have broken the trust with security people by not taking security seriously, right? Like, both sides have been there. I've been on both sides of that fence, and I'm sure I've broken trust in both ways. Yeah, it starts off with a very human connection between those teams, spending time together, getting to know each other, talking about your kids, whatever. Like, that helps along the way. The fundamental, like, implementing of work, though, can't start until you trust each other. Yeah. Over time, the way as I always talk to security teams, like, how do you build trust with IT? Go out and make them successful. Mm-hmm. Go put your resources. And Matt Schufeld, one of the folks over at EVOTEK who you work with, Dave, like, he's one of the best I know at this. Like, I'm going to go put my smartest people on solving IT's biggest problems for them, because that's how we win together. You build trust in that way. Once you've built trust, when I come to you and say, hey, this is an important thing, then you believe me, right? Because you know that I'm here to make you successful as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that trust is absolutely everything. And leaning in, be it whichever side of that is, whichever team it is, it's actually a team of one. And we hear that in a number of organizations. And it's the truth. It's a team of one. We're all here to move this forward. So coming in and asking those teams, asking the IT team, how can I help you? I mean, I have these concerns or these findings, and I want to work with you, not just hand this off and say, you got to fix it. Let's come up with a priority. Let me understand what you're doing and what your priorities are, so I can actually help work in the security priorities that I'm finding into your system and into your approach, and we can come to something collaborative and actually make progress here. It has to be one team. It can't be two teams working at odds. It will never work. And you will have an incident at some point in time, and then everything's so much worse. And then there's blame, and that's
the finger pointing. The finger pointing.
Exactly. And we don't want to be finger pointing to any other teams. We want to be honest about, here were our shortcomings. Here are the things we didn't find. So that transparency, that honesty, that's really key. And when you see teams that do that, like, if you ever have a moment where there's something as a security professional, you fall on your sword appropriately. I'm not talking about something just for the sake of doing it. And those other teams see it when you take responsibility for it, that goes a long way to building up that trust.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, Dave, I know we're got like 3 minutes left. Any final points, any words of wisdom that you wanted to make sure we got through?
Yeah, I think tools are great, but tools are only as good as their care and feeding. So you can't rely on the tool to do it all. It can't just be turn it on and let it go. It's got to be care and feeding and a mindful approach to whatever tool it is. Something we didn't talk about in depth, but I think is important to notice, for alerting, it makes good sense to try to get your alerting into a single place, into a single data place. If you've got alerts that are coming out from multiple tools simultaneously, builds up a lot of noise, builds up more alert fatigue. So trying to consolidate. And then, like we talked about with this collaborative piece of team building between internal teams, security and otherwise, that's huge. And I think it's a big part of the success I've seen in organizations is when they break that down and make it very collaborative. So, yeah, I mean, there could be a whole TED talk on that, and it would be a good one, I think. Yeah. Yourself, Rob?
I'll do a quick sales pitch for EVOTEK. I'm sure if folks are looking to make this migration, that you guys have resources to help them, embrace that engineering mindset and go from the reactive to making that step to proactive.
Yeah.
On the Red Canary side, we built a whole MDR practice over exactly this, around engineering away the false positives to make sure we're really focused laser-like on the real things. And we'd be happy to talk about it with anyone who wants to.
Absolutely. So thank you all so very much for your time here. I know we're coming up at it. Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate you joining me here today at the Security Summit and on this discussion. It's one that I'm sure we can have for hours, given the opportunity. And I thank everybody for joining us here today. I know that we've got other booths coming up, so thank you very much. I hope everybody has a really great day.
All right. See you guys.
Thanks.